Town podcast for a Monday. It's Christmas week, ladies and gentlemen. How it has snuck up on us. Well, on me at least.
What else have you been doing? What else have you been doing?
Not a damn thing.
I mean,
And I expect Christmas Day will be no more special than today or yesterday. Although I probably won't have to see you, so I'm thankful.
It's not Thanksgiving. It's Christmas.
It's John. Well, you can be thankful on Christmas Day too.
Okay.
John Shannon is, of course, here, and joining us to talk about the developments in the hockey world, Bruce Garrioch of Post Media out of Ottawa, and Scott Burnside of The Athletic, who's in Atlanta and ready to go. Well, it looks like we have a go-ahead for January, John, 13?
Yes, sir.
And yet there are many questions still to be answered. Burnside, to you first. Any of them concern you dramatically, or things you think these are things that the NHL will sort out?
You mean other than where will all the teams play, and can they start somewhere and finish somewhere, and how many of
those are the questions.
And I sort of half jest, but I mean, we still don't know. Certainly, we have a lot more certainty that there will be a Canadian division than I think we did 4 or 5 days ago. I think the idea that, that at some point the 7 Canadian teams could pick up and go south of the border because of not being able to satisfy the wants and needs of the 5 different provincial health ministries. To me, that was a deal breaker. If you have to move south with those 7 teams, I fail to see how you could do it. But it looks like the Canadian teams will stay north. We really don't know, though, whether all 7 Canadian teams will start in their own buildings. Will they finish in their own buildings? And, everything we talk about with this, as we talk about with all our lives, is predicated on what happens with COVID-19. And we don't know. We know we're in, even as we talk optimistically about the dispersal of vaccines on both sides of the border and around the world, we still are in the worst of the worst. And it's not going to get better. At least medical officials don't believe it's going to get any better in the short term. So, and I think the NHL and the NHLPA are, like they don't live in a bubble, if I can use that term. They don't live in a vacuum. So they understand that. And I think what you'll see is a lot of contingency plans and a league that has proven itself to be very nimble all the way through this. And that's going to be required going forward, no question about it. But I feel more optimistic about it than I did a week ago.
Garrioch, the consensus seems to be that the 2 Ontario teams, the Maple Leafs and the Senators, will get approvals from the provincial governments to proceed. The same is expected in Quebec, but BC appears to be the most likely stumbling block. What do you hear? What do you know?
Well, one of the things I know is that Ontario has just raised the issue of all of this in the last 48 hours or so. Now, we know that in the past, the Ontario government has come around, that Toronto is a hub city in the summer. I think the NHL has made the point that they had a perfect hub. There were no positive tests when they were in Toronto in the summer, and that's why the province should come around. I think BC remains a huge stumbling block. I think John would tell you, and anybody else would tell you, that when the league was negotiating with British Columbia in the summer, they thought they had a deal, and then at the last minute, the league threw a wrench into it. I believe that even with Ontario going into lockdown, they will come around on these 2 teams, but I'm not convinced that British Columbia will come around and allow the Canucks to play in Vancouver. And if that happens, guys, then the Canucks are going to have to play somewhere else.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing for me, Bruce, is what that all this discussion of all 7 teams being forced to go south of the border made little or no sense. It was put out there in order to try to create some news and create some pressure. if the Canucks play, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up in Edmonton or Calgary.
Yeah.
Probably in Edmonton, because Edmonton seems to have handled bubbles better than anybody else of recent. We're witnessing it now with the start of the World Juniors coming later in the week. But there's still no approvals in Quebec, although, I mean, Quebec has been very open, even in junior hockey, to try to make things work. Even though they haven't worked, they're going to try to make things work. Ontario will come around. Manitoba has changed its opinion. So you're right. It's back to Dr. Henry and the people in British Columbia have always said, because in the summertime, we were going to Vancouver. There was no question we were going to Vancouver for the bubble. But the public health department in British Columbia wanted to interject itself into the scheduling of games, the postponement of games, and that was just something the NHL could not fathom when they were trying to put the original bubble together.
Was there a sense there though that just one small point, was there a sense there, John, that if one player tested positive, that the whole bubble got shut down? And the other thing I was wondering is there any possibility that they put the Canucks in Saskatoon?
Well, the first part is true. They wanted to regulate as soon as there were some positive cases. Then the BC Public Health wanted to be involved in everything when it came to player safety, as well as safety of the arena workers. The reality, and I think the NHL proved this out when there were discussions in the summer, you cannot have a non-NHL arena host a team anymore. There's too much infrastructure when it comes to video review, cameras, everything like that, the real-time stats program. There's so much involved that's technically so positive of an NHL arena. You can't go to another arena and have a level playing field. So what we're talking about is the Canucks having to play in an NHL city. And obviously, to me, the easiest one would be one in Alberta.
Yeah. And it doesn't, I mean, does it really matter? I mean,
no, well, look, San Jose's going. San Jose's going to Arizona.
Yeah. And they're going to start their training camp there. And depending on what happens with Santa Clara County, they may end up playing some games there. I think the NHL is quite prepared. And my sense of it, the NHLPA is on board with this, that there may need to be some twinning, and the twinning may not be just at the start. It may happen a week in. It may happen a month in, where a certain, an outbreak or continued spiking or whatever, and a state government or a local health official or group like in Santa Clara County says, okay, we're going to lock it down even further for a month. And teams will just go and I'm with you, John. I know that the NHL's raised the idea of a neutral site. It makes no sense. And also, if you're trying to reduce travel, why would you go to a neutral site if you can twin with another NHL city? It cuts down on the travel exponentially. So I don't see it's a big deal. To me, the bigger issue is, well, if you can keep all 7 Canadian teams north of the border, which appears to be the case, then now you can go. And may not be how we think it is right now, but I don't see it. I don't see it as being a big issue at all.
One of the things that came up, I'm going to say several weeks ago, was the notion of teams traveling to play at least 2 games in a city when they make a road trip. So, for example, if Ottawa went out to Edmonton, they play 2 games against the Oilers, then go down, probably play 2 games against the Flames, and then 2 games probably against the Canucks wherever they play. Do you guys know? Have you heard whether that's still on the agenda?
My understanding is as long as the teams play on their own rinks, yeah, Bob, that's the plan right now, is to, if the Ottawa Senators or Toronto Maple Leafs go to Western Canada, it'll be a 10 to 12 day trip with probably 2 to 3 games in each city. I think someone told me that on one of the schedules that was kind of being floated around, that Ottawa was going to play 3 games in Edmonton at one point. One thing it could set up, Scott, is it could set up some pretty good rivalries, couldn't it? I mean, that second game is probably going to be pretty good if that in fact is the way they go.
Yeah, and I think you're right on. I mean, the math is a little bit different, obviously, with the 7 Canadian teams, right? And you're playing 56 games, so that makes my head hurt. But you're talking 9 to 10
Yeah.
games, so you could play 3 games in one visit, and it would, that fits your schedule. To me, the 3 8-team divisions in the States, you're going in and you're playing 4 at home, 4 on the road against everyone else in your division. So, the math works out. Yeah, to me, it doesn't make any sense to go somewhere and play 3 games, but so the math works out. Go in. If Colorado goes to LA, 2 games there, down the road, 2 games against Anaheim, go to Arizona and play 4 games against Coyotes and the Sharks, maybe not on the same trip, but I mean, you start to see how the schedule is going to unfold pretty quickly, given the nice math of it, and that's part of the reason the 56 games make sense for the 3 American-based divisions. And I'm curious to see what you guys think. I think it has the potential to be. Listen, everyone I think loves the idea of what the dynamic with the Canadian division, and as you point out, Bruce, the potential for, like, who doesn't want to see Toronto, Ottawa back to back or twice in 3 nights, the Battle of Alberta, all those kinds of things. I wonder what it's going to be like in the West, especially. You've got 3 California teams in various states of rebuild. 3 of those, all 3 California teams failed to make the return to play. Man, that's a lot of games against junk teams if those teams continue to struggle. And it does create, that division for me. It'll be interesting to see, but you live with what you've got to live with, right? I mean, you can't make, you're going to have lousy teams. It's just that most of them are now potentially in that West division.
Let me ask another question here of you guys who I assume know the answer that I don't know, and that is, we understand the Canadian teams, the proposal is the Canadian teams will not cross the border. These 7 teams will play in a division exclusively. They will play each other for 56 games, whether you think that's good or bad. What happens in the 3 divisions that are American-based? Will there be any interdivisional games there?
No.
No?
No.
So the plan is you have your group of 8, and that's who you play against.
I think, the whole concept of safety being part of this, limiting travel, although when you're in the Western Division, limiting travel means you're only in 3 time zones, just like Canada. And really what they're trying to do is replicate, I think, closer to what happened in Major League Baseball, Bob, with the 60-game schedule. There was limited travel there. They did try to keep people in their own divisions for all intents and purposes. And then the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, in fact, Bob, will be within your own division. And then the only time, and I think this is done for a reason, the only time that you play outside your division will be in the conference final and the Stanley Cup final, which, if the pandemic continues, could be done in a bubble for a month, right?
Now, one thing the NHL has not faced, or did not face last year, was any kind of an outbreak. And
well, they did a magnificent job, though. I mean, in both at Toronto and
bravo, congratulations. I'm not being critical. I'm simply stating a fact. We have not seen what happens if there is an outbreak. We have seen it to some extent. Well, we saw it in soccer. We saw it in baseball. We've now seen it in the National Football League. We've certainly seen it in college football. Now, all of a sudden, you've got teams that are traveling. The chance of going through a season without somebody getting it is pretty slim. Wouldn't you agree? And now all of a sudden, is there a contingency plan to reschedule games or work around things? And I say this because we're now seeing a proposal of 56 games being played in 4 months. That's more than 16 games a month, 16 and a half games a month. And limited travel, and maybe Edmonton has 2 teams playing in the same arena. You don't have a whole lot of wiggle room here.
No, and you know what, Bob? It's interesting because no, the NHL didn't have any outbreaks when it returned to play, but Ottawa is a team that had a huge outbreak. I think they had as many as as 8 players and 10 people on that plane, if you include the broadcaster who got it, Gord Wilson, after they came back from California when the league went on pause.
Right.
And you look at that situation, you look how quickly it spread on that plane. The National Hockey League can say all it wants to its players. When we go on the road, you can't eat at the hotel dining room. You've got to order room service or Uber Eats. You've got to participate in team meals, and you can't walk to the rink. But there will be no control of these players when they're in their own cities. I mean, you can't tell a player to not go out for dinner, Bob. And you're right. There has to be some contingency built in.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons why that they're limiting the schedule, so that you only have to worry about juggling within the division if you need to reschedule a postponed game of some sort against one of your 7 or 8 rivals. The other thing is the learning curve, again, although some of the players that were in the bubble understood it, the learning curve is exactly what Major League Baseball did go through for those first 6 weeks, when the Marlins were in terrible shape, when the Cardinals were in terrible shape, and then everybody bought into the program. And really it was, in the end, Bruce, it became peer pressure amongst the players to say, hey, what are you doing? Why are you jeopardizing our team? Why are you jeopardizing the schedule so that you can go out and have a beer in a bar? Now, I'm not sure there's going to be any bars open in North America at that point, although in certain cities there obviously will be. But that to me is something I think that they've probably given a lot of concern to, and there'll be a buffer of 7 days near the end of the year where rescheduled games can be played.
Yeah, but Bob's point's a good one, though. I mean, and we don't know what'll happen. I talked to somebody from the league, and if you're talking 1 or 2 games, and you have, whatever the threshold is going to be, if you've got 1 or 2 positive cases, and you have to pull a team back or whatever you have to do, what I'm not sure will happen is if a team can't play for 3 weeks, and then that is a whole other. I mean, that becomes the. That's where you're talking about a completely different discussion, because you can't reschedule 7 or 8 games at that end, and baseball was able to, what they do, 2, they did mini double headers, 7-inning games. I mean, they were able to, manipulate their own game in a way to deal with the missteps early on. The NHL has some wiggle room, but they don't have that kind of wiggle room. And that'll be the, again, we don't know, right? I mean, you hope to think that you've learned what happened in the bubbles in Toronto and Edmonton. You can apply that, but we don't know, and we're going to find out.
What are the rosters going to look like? I assume, remember, we have no minor hockey being played, at least minor professional hockey being played, I assume. I haven't heard. Expansion of rosters. 5 guys get sick. Are there 5 guys to replace them? Or do you wind up in a scenario where, because of the dangers, and this is the other thing you got to remember, and we tend to forget this. This happened a lot in the National Football League. 1 guy gets sick. Now, all of a sudden, maybe you have to shut down the whole thing, because for the next 2 or 3 days, you're not sure whether that's spread. So, what do we know about the alternatives for adding players if, in fact, somebody tests positive? Anybody?
Well, you can add up to the teams are allowed 23-man rosters. You're allowed up to 6 players extra. I just wonder if every NHL team is carrying 29 players. To Bob's point, is there going to be any point in having an American Hockey League this season? I know they plan to start on February 5th, and you've got to have those guys available so that you can bring them into your team, especially the Canadian teams that have American Hockey League franchises south of the border.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, and I think that 4 to 6 man taxi squad, that gets you off the ground, right? Because there are no other options. The other thing is each team will have to have 3 goaltenders. available, so you don't run into the situation. To me, the ultimate embarrassment for the NFL is the game the Denver Broncos played without a quarterback. And I think the NHL, you learn from that kind of, to me, that's as ugly as it gets.
Yeah.
And the NHL doesn't want it to find itself and with all due respect to David Ayers, who was a great story coming in to beat the Leafs, as the emergency backup goalie. But I think this is, you try and hedge your bets as much as possible. So having 3 goalies, you hope that you don't get into a situation where a team, can't, doesn't have any goalies. And again, I think this is to start the season, because I think we're going to see a lot of permutations as the season moves along. And certainly if the AHL is able to get up and start running in some fashion in early February, as Bruce mentioned, then maybe you tweak things as you move along. And as the vaccine become more widely available, that's the anticipation on both sides of the border, certainly as we head into spring and summer. So again, I think what we talk about now, we do this again in early February, we may be talking about a whole other set of dynamics.
Yeah, I think that's important to note, is that the rules that start the season aren't the rules 30 games in, and aren't the rules at the end, and aren't the rules in the playoffs. Just because I think people have every hope that we're a little over the hump. Although, I mean, let's face it, Dr. Fauci has told everybody every time, including every commissioner of professional sports in North America, that January 15th is when the pandemic could be at its worst. So those are things that have to be concerned. But how we start, where we start on the 13th is not necessarily where we're going to end. And for the first time in a long time, this is a very conservative sport. This is stay in your lane sport. And everybody's going to have to be flexible. The teams are going to have to be flexible. The broadcasters are going to have to be flexible. The fans are going to have to be flexible to make sure that the season can finish. And then the integrity of the Stanley Cup playoffs, if there is such a thing, aren't compromised when they start in mid-May.
It seems to me too, guys, that we're going to see a wide variance in the number of fans that are allowed into various arenas in various locales. There are some states in the United States, everybody seems to have a different policy statewide in the US. Are we sure that nobody's going to be allowed in the building in Canada, at least for the foreseeable future?
I am. I don't see us seeing any Canadian fans at all until further notice. I really don't. I mean, we're going to be lucky to have teams in arenas, let alone
John,
fans.
I get that, but it wasn't that long ago you were talking about the possibility that at some point during this season, a month in, 2 months in, fans would start to be allowed into the arenas, and the NHL actually discussed that possibility, that wish that things develop.
But
where we sit right now, there's no optimism.
That's where the pandemic is.
Well, there's no level of optimism that can happen.
No. Well, I mean, with Dallas says that Dallas is saying now that they might put up to 5,000 people.
But that's Texas, and that's one of the worst hit COVID places, and those rednecks don't know what they're doing. So you're not gonna listen to what Texas does. I mean, California's been hit hard, but at least the government there has shut things down aggressively. In Texas, they're still walking around with their Stetsons on, thinking nothing's wrong. I can't catch this. I mean, I'm gonna take my cue from Texas or Florida.
Yeah, but I don't think no one's taken their cues from any of those. They take their own cues from their own people, Bob.
Well, I know.
But that's in Florida, and we know this because the Raptors, who of course can't play in Toronto, but are going to play at Amalie Arena. I mean, Amalie has all kinds of safeguards in place. They believe that, and with the blessing of local health officials, they're going to be able to have and I can't remember what the number is 4,000 or whatever the number is, let's call it 25%. I assume the Lightning, following similar protocols, as long as they continue to work, they will have fans at Amalie Arena when they begin. But that doesn't, again, and this is where it's difficult for the NHL, because they have to sort through, 24 different sets of realities, plus the 5 provincial governments north of the border. And I'm not sure, Matt, player, I'm not even sure. I mean, it helps revenue wise, but it's a small thing, relatively speaking. It's really about, can you do it safely? Does it impact the ability of the games to go on if you do have some fans in there? I think it's a bit of a red herring, frankly. I mean, until you get to a point where it's possible that fans across the board are going to be allowed in, and what happens protocol wise, and what happens, how many people will actually buy tickets when they're able to. And I think that's the thing that the NHL doesn't know yet. And, hopefully maybe they get a sense of that by the very end of this season or into the playoffs. But that's, again, no one knows that yet.
Bob, one thing, sorry, Bob, one of the things that the 7 Canadian presidents of the teams have focused on through the course of this is selling season tickets for the 21-22 season. I don't think there are any plans in place to have any fans in Canadian buildings this season. I think that pretty much every Canadian team has accepted that fact, Bob, and to that point you made, and they're focused on trying to sell their season tickets for next season. And what they're hoping to get is maybe a little bit of revenue from their rink boards by playing in their own rinks.
Yeah, and I, look, people say things and they want to say the right thing. What they're going to do behind the scenes is entirely different. Eugene Melnick, owner of your local franchise, was on this program, John, a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and in the course of the conversation, he opined that he could put 6,000 people safely in his building. I mean, I love Eugene, but that's nuts, isn't it? That's crazy. I mean, it's just, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, they like to tell you that their priority is safety. But the truth of the matter is that while safety is a priority, so are economics. So is limiting the losses that these owners are going to sustain. So greed, lust, and pestilence is going to rear its ugly head at some point here in at least a few places. And what I get concerned about is if you get 4,000 people, 5,000 people in a particular arena, Dallas, Tampa, Miami, wherever, and there's no huge outbreak, although I'm not sure how you could tell, that others will be emboldened by that and say, well, look, they did it. It was okay.
I don't think so, Bob. I don't think so, Bob. I mean, you talked about California. Governor Gavin Newsom has been vigilant about this.
Oh, no, there's jurisdictions. I acknowledge that, John. Yeah.
Andrew Cuomo. I mean, of all the places in the United States, I'd be watching the state of New York. When you think of the Islanders, Rangers, and Sabres, and if they go into a deeper lockdown, just like we are in some of the places in Canada. I mean, there are things to be concerned about in being able to play games or being able to move and use postponed games. So I think that there's an awareness of all this. And on the other side, then you got 31 general managers who are now, or at least 10 of them now, are in sweating deeply because they've got to get under the salary cap for the 13th of January as well. So there's going to be, it's such a strange period of time when you've got the business side, you've got the health side, and then you got the hockey guys in the middle saying, we're starting when, and what can I do? And I've got to understand how to manage my money, and I don't really have very much money. It's an interesting time to be in the game.
Yeah.
One of the points that Eugene Melnick made on your podcast, so Bob, that I thought was interesting was the whole notion of having a rapid test, and that would be your way to get your 6,000 people in the building properly socially distanced with masks on. And I talked to him later about it after you had spoken to him, and he said one of the things that he's looking into is a rapid test where you're tested when you go in the parking lot. The result takes about 15 minutes, half an hour. You get a green light on your phone and you can go in while you sit in the parking lot. Does it sound far-fetched? Who knows?
Well, I don't know if is it safe?
Yeah.
I don't pretend to know the answer to that.
Yeah. To me, the Bruce raised this point, and to me, this is the critical part of it is all of this is an exercise in getting something done. It's that 56 games, 2021, you have a 4-round playoff. If you can get through that, the expectation is that you can then get back to a normal schedule starting in October of 21. Seattle comes in. Now you disperse the expansion fees. You have, assuming the IOC doesn't screw things up, which they have in the past, you have a look ahead to the 22 Olympics in Beijing with the NHL back at it. And maybe you start to claw your way out of this. But it's kind of a domino thing. And this is, with all the uncertainty, it's critical that whatever happens. And that's why I think the fans in the building is a bit of a red herring. Because, as Bruce pointed out, I don't think anyone, certainly can't expect it's going to happen. If you can do it safely in some buildings, at some point they will. But this is really about getting this season done and then moving forward. And I think that's really what that's really sort of the long-term focus of this. Get this done, get through it, and let's see what happens next fall.
What do we do? What do we do when we get to the playoffs in the NHL? What do we do about travel at that point? Now you're going to, at some point, there is a guarantee that either an American team is going to have to travel to Canada or a Canadian team is going to have to travel to the US. And are you going to play in neutral sites? Are you going to go back into bubbles? Do we know the answers to any of these questions?
No, because we don't know what the landscape will look like. And we don't know whether that border will be, obviously, if the Canadian border remains closed and requires 14-day quarantines for even people who are allowed into the country, that's not going to happen. So as John alluded to, then you have to decide what you're going to do. Are you going to play, where are you going to play the games? Do they go to the Canadian, does the Canadian divisional winner go to the States and they play 2 rounds possibly and finish up the conference final and the Stanley Cup final in the States in some sort of hub or mini bubble or whatever? Do the American teams come north and do the same? No one knows that, but I think that's the point of having only divisional play. It's why hopefully by that point, the landscape looks different. And the Canadian government may say, hey, we feel we're at a pretty good place with vaccines and outbreaks. And yes, we will allow this. And so you can have a normal, playoff grid set up. But I think that's the whole point of playing divisions. So you got 2 rounds of playoffs in Canada. Maybe by the end of that, you get to a point where things are a lot different and a lot more clear in terms of how it'll work out. But yeah, no one knows.
Yeah, I have so many questions.
Who knows, Bob?
My mind's, we don't know the answers to any of these things, I guess. And I'm sympathetic to the NHL. They can't answer all these questions at this time, but you get to first round of playoffs or first 2 rounds of playoffs are going to be within the division. Are they going to travel? Is it going to be, the usual 2-2, 1-1-1 or whatever? Are they going to play in neutral sites, all 7 games? Are they going to go into quarantine? And then you get to round 3, presumably. Now you got to go across the border, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of things still to be determined, I assume.
Yes.
Guys, a pleasure seeing you. We wish you a happy holiday season, and we look forward to having the opportunity to have you rejoin us sometime in the new year, and keep our fingers crossed that this NHL experiment works out. GARRIOCH, Burnside, thank you, pals.
Thank
you. Shannon, talk to you on Wednesday.
Yes,
That's
sir.
it for the podcast for today. Have a good one.